Hello, Dr. Barton, and anyone else whose YouTube algorithm has led them to this point. My name is Brooks Robbins, and today I will be breaking down why I believe that David Letterman was a transformational leader in the field of late night television. Um, when I started this assignment, this book really jumped off the shelf for me. I was a big fan of late night TV as a child and still am, but our family was very TV centric, you could say, if it wasn't about sports or reality shows that my father loved. Late night was always a big staple for me when I should have been sleeping. So this should be fun. David Letterman was born outside of Indianapolis, Indiana in 1947 to Harry and Dorothy Letterman. Him and his mother, funny, couldn't be much different as far as their personalities were concerned. She was very much reserved, and he was quite the opposite. His father was much more like him in his sensibilities and his sense of humor. Some of his fondest memories as a child they shared together, riding in the car and listening to their favorite radio show, Monitor, starring Bob Elliott and Ray Goulding. He would actually have Bob and Ray on his show later when he was a talk show host, proclaiming that if you like Bob and Ray, you're cool with me. He would even employ Bob Elliott's son later to work on his show, and he did really great work there. As he moved into college, he kind of knew what field he wanted to get into. When he attended Ball State in 1965, he quickly joined a fraternity where he found a bunch of like-minded individuals like himself, aka goofballs. He found a bunch of work working in radio stations everywhere from a weatherman to a newscaster. He even worked the booth, oftentimes as a booth operator, but he really found his strength as a lead man. Anytime that he was on the airwaves, he would find himself getting in trouble because he would go against the wishes of his employers, which would turn out to be a pattern in his career. But it seemed like it worked out well for him early on. One of the neighboring stations, they actually brought him on to have his own daily show once they found out about his antics, and he quickly grew a very cult following in the state of Indiana. A little sad turn of events early in his life when his father passed from when he had another heart attack. He'd had several in his life, but this was kind of a wake-up call for Dave to move out to Los Angeles and really pursue his career in comedy. At this point, he had been married to his girlfriend in college, Michelle Cook, who supported him throughout this entire process. But soon after they moved to LA, the long hours and them working opposite jobs, as in him working at night and her working during the day, this caused a lot of strain, and eventually they would split. But Dave found a lot of really good work at the Comedy Store, as a lot of young comics did, working next to some of the biggest giants that you can imagine in comedy. One of those was even Jay Leno, which at the time was a regular at the Comedy Store, kind of an unknown talent, but we all know how that worked out, and they would soon become rivals in their respective spaces. He also met a very pivotal person in his life that would transform them for the better. Now, her name was Meryl Marco. Not only would she become his lead writer on a lot of his projects, they would also become lovers for a very long time. I always thought it was funny with comedy. I actually pursued comedy for a little while. Listening is so important, not just for your audience. You want your audience to listen, but listening from people that have done it for a long time and just understanding and picking their brains about their process and how they go about it. I think the excerpt from Tamal and the teacher leader is very thought provoking here. It's just something that kind of came across my mind. After a lot of long nights at the Comedy Store, he eventually got picked up by Johnny Carson to do a spot on The Tonight Show, which at the time was the biggest show in America and even today still is. And he absolutely crushed. He had the audience in stitches, and Johnny Carson immediately fell in love with him. This would lead to NBC actually giving him a daytime show, which, if you know anything about David Letterman, he was much more effective at night. And I think that the night audience really understood him a little bit more. But he did a lot of really great things in the short 4-month run that the David Letterman show aired on NBC during the day, the 9 o'clock slot in the morning. This is actually where Meryl Marco kind of started to bloom as a creator and tried a lot of really inventive things on the air. This is actually where Stupid Pet Tricks got its start. And if you know anything about that, that's a lot of good YouTube humor if you want to go back and reference some of that. Even though the day show didn't last very long, NBC wanted to bring him back on to follow up Carson on the even later night 12:30 slot on NBC, which Dave really seemed to thrive in this atmosphere. This was right when most people would start to tune out after Carson had signed off, but this gave them another 90 minutes to really get creative. Marco leaned into the stupid humor, as they called it a lot. They actually use stupid as an endearing term, but they really, really, really got after it here and did some really creative bits and had a lot of fun in the process. They got together with a lot of really talented writers, a lot of young Harvard writers, most notably Max Pross and Tom Gamble, who would go on to work on very, very big projects, including The Simpsons even. So this was a very, very fun time and late night, and it would lead to much bigger things in Dave's career. As I sit here and talk about a man that I only saw the end of his run and missed kind of his heyday, obviously there's YouTube for that. You think about the people that came before you and how they shaped kind of your upbringing. For Dave, that man was Steve Allen, the host of the Steve Allen Show, before he eventually went on to host the Tonight Show before Johnny Carson. Jack Parr was also pivotal in this, but he really, really admired Steve Allen's quirky humor and really felt a sense of belonging with him, that they were kind of kindred spirits. He had Steve Allen on the show one time, and they joked that David said that he had hosted for 3 years. He said it was actually 5 years, felt like 3. And then he made the same retort about Jack, saying that it was actually 3 years, felt like 5, which I thought was kind of funny. Throughout reading John Maxwell this semester, the piece where he talks about how we're influenced every day by so many people, I think the few people that really make a big difference on us are the ones that stick with us for a long time. And clearly for Dave, Steve Allen was that person. As things really started to take off for the show, Dave's star was just starting to completely accelerate, and he was one of the biggest men in show business at this point. They started to really lean into the absurd as if they hadn't already, but the show just became more and more off the rails as things really started to go, and they started taking bigger risk after bigger risk. This would not stop anytime soon, if you know what happened in 1988, which we're about to talk about. But on screen, Dave came off as this charming, goofy, kind of quirky guy. But behind the scenes, it was quite a different story. He was very depressed, struggled with his own self-image. There was a lot of things that were going on behind the scenes that a lot of people didn't really know about, except for his writing staff. And that would prove to cause a lot of strain along the way. In 1988, during the writer's strike, Dave really hit a crossroad where he had to really lean on his own strengths more so than having the writers, the really, really talented writers that he had on the staff to help kind of bolster the show. And this led to a lot of time being wasted. His producer actually came up with the idea of network time killers, where they would just do absurd things on the air. I think they brought in like a tailor to actually get his measurements for like 10 minutes on air one night, which actually led to some pretty good comedy. If you didn't think that the show was falling off the rails before, I mean, this was really when it started to hit the fan. Dave became more and more frustrated on the air. Some of these warts that we talked about behind the scenes were really starting to show themselves. And believe it or not, the ratings didn't dip. Like, people loved it. They ate it up. And they found it compelling that this man was slowly starting to lose his mind on the air. But it really made Dave kind of look deeper inside during this time and say, I'm not as good without the people that I've grown to know and work behind. And when Strike et al. Mentioned this in my readings this semester, the key to growth is self-assessment and reflection. I really think that speaks volumes when it comes to taking a look inside and seeing that we are stronger together than we are separate. As I mentioned before, even after the writer's strike was over, Dave was becoming more and more unwound. It seemed by the year he really started to kind of lean into his dark humor and embrace these edges and warts that he had grown to kind of despise. Before that, he'd come off more quirky and kind of reserved, but also very cutting and sarcastic and dry. Now he was doing this kind of caricature of himself where these big, roarous laughs would just come out of nowhere as if he actually was losing his mind. But some speculated that this was a man who had realized everything he had ever wanted and was now taking full advantage of it. He really leaned on one of his newest writers, Rob Burnett. Rob was, I don't want to say a suck up, but he did all the coffee work, getting papers for Dave, really just trying to do everything to get into his graces. And it seemed to really work. And after a while, Dave really trusted him more so than everyone else on screen. and behind the scenes. And this really put even more strain on the writers' room and the producers. Looking back on the teacher leader again, when Tamal mentions the perception of actual favoritism, giving a team members by the teacher leader, in this case, a leader, can be very demotivating factor for the people involved. And I think you could say the same for his crew in this situation. As the show moved through the 90s, CBS actually came and scooped up Letterman, which I'd hardly say that he was poached. Letterman openly kind of sold himself on the open market when it was announced that NBC had no interest in replacing Johnny Carson with David Letterman for the 11:30 slot, but instead went with his longtime rival, Jay Leno. Um, Dave kind of really leaned into this, even though later on this would kind of be more of a crutch for his career. Early on in the CBS ratings, I mean, he was crushing Leno. Like, still, people were very loyal to Dave. But over the years, people really started to kind of lean more on the Leno side of the TV wars, where Leno was doing more goofy, outgoing things, and Dave started to kind of sink more and more into his shell and get away from the things that made him so successful. One of those things was actually poking fun at NBC on the air. Now that the big bad man was gone, and it was no secret that him and NBC did not get along, especially some of the top execs, CBS treated him like a king. And when you have everything that you want, you really have nothing to complain about. And he's found that that really didn't make for a very compelling comedy act. The late night wars went back and forth for years. Dave continued to do the show until 2015, and there were a lot of very memorable moments from here to there. Some of the most heartwarming and touching parts were after 9/11, where he really let his true colors show and really let loose some of those emotions that he had kind of reserved from the audience for years. That really kind of breathed an air of brevity and kind of camaraderie back into the scene. Obviously, if you have not been living under a rock, you've heard about the 2009 scandal where he was accused and later came out and admitted that he had been having an affair with another woman that worked on the show in lieu of him just marrying his new wife, Regina Lasco. This really tore him up and really did a number on his psyche. Obviously, I mean, the man was in the wrong, but he was so deathly afraid of losing his family. And I do really believe that he had a problem. From there, again, the self-reflection grew. And I think now he's made peace with it. But this was a very, very difficult time for him. The show itself had such a legacy. People really clung to it and loved it for years. And it was a very, very sad time to watch him go in 2015, even though Stephen Colbert was more than capable of filling those shoes. When we talk about transforming something, I mean, TV is never the same after Dave, right? Throughout the years, even though he would try to distance himself from his writers, those brilliant people that worked on that show really made the show what it was. And I think it was the better for it, even throughout the different eras and the different phases of the show, right? And again, getting back to Maxwell, when we talk about how there's strength in numbers, one is too small of a number to achieve greatness. Few things surpass helping your team win together. And this team, I really do believe they won and won and won again. Now, I know this looks like a fanboy page on Tumblr, but again, I kind of think it's charming. I was a big fan of television, still am to a detriment, especially with all the work I have to do. But late night really, really has a special place in my heart. I was a big fan of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and even more so of Stephen Colbert. Even at a young age, I didn't realize that he was doing a satire, but now it just makes it even more funny, right? And now you can't even look around at any late night host without seeing Letterman's impact, right? Whether it be the fun games that Fallon would play on the air and the absurdity of Conan, or even when, especially Craig Ferguson would hit on the female or guests, for better or worse. These are all things that are directly out of Letterman's playbook. And I think they're still feeling the effects today. And if you can't tell from the central theme here, a little more niche category, I am a huge fan of the cult classic Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Me and my father would watch this. It was our favorite nighttime cartoon. It was Cartoon Network's actual first original cartoon, and it would go on to actually pioneer Adult Swim, which was a counter programming effort on Cartoon Network that has now grown into a brand of its own. So when you connect the dots, yes, David Letterman had a offhand in creating Adult Swim. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. It's been a pleasure for me. I really enjoyed it. And of course, to send you off with something a little more funny, Let's hear a top 10 list from the man himself.
Top 10 list, little icebreakers, little things that you can discuss with your friends and family at breakfast tomorrow or later at work. From the home office in Scottsdale, Arizona, tonight's category, top 10 reasons why TV is better than books. And it really is. Top 10 reasons why TV is better than books. Number 10, book readers miss out on KTEL record offers. Number 9, can't drive and read at the same time. Number 8, no one ever got a paper cut from Hugh Downs. Number 7, books ask difficult questions but don't give away cars or Caribbean cruises for right answers. Number 6, books written by pasty-skinned geeks, TV full of chesty babes. Number 5, Soul Train. Number 4, learning to work TV set, solid training for future astronauts. Number 3, TV easier to spell than book. Number 2, no fun to dance in your underwear in front of book about Jane Pauley. Number 1, Ralph Waldo Emerson, The Equalizer. Enough said. There you go. It's not so much a TV show as it is a nightly desperate cry for help. Top 10 list.
Thanks, Dave.